This is a story about the disaster of a modern passenger airplane, which until recently was considered a technological marvel of the aviation industry. It concerns the famous Boeing 787 Dreamliner, which, contrary to all expectations, disintegrated just 32 seconds after taking off from the Indian city of Ahmedabad. An embodiment of engineering thought, this airliner was created from advanced composite materials and equipped with complex software systems, promising to become a symbol of the future of air travel. However, it became a symbol of tragedy, turning into a fireball and claiming the lives of 242 people. Accounts of such disasters in our time seem incredible, like footage from old archives of the mid-20th century when aviation was still developing. But no, these are not photographs of an old, time-served aircraft. These are images of one of the most modern creations of Boeing, a company that for decades was considered the standard of reliability and engineering excellence. Yet, such horrifying scenes, wreckage in the Ivan Sea, scorched patches of land near Bishoftu in Ethiopia, are becoming alarmingly familiar. Shattered fuselages, torn-off wings, charred engines, all parts of machines that were considered too perfect to fall. What went wrong? This is not just a story about a software error or a single tragic flight. It is a tale of a company that once helped shape the very concept of modern aviation, but over time began to lose not only quality and principles, but also its own soul. The phrase, "If it's Boeing, I'm going," which once was synonymous with complete trust, today more often sounds different. If it's Boeing, I ain't going. Boeing, for many decades, was the gold standard in the world of aviation. This company created the Boeing 707, the first jetliner that opened a new era of long-haul flights. Then came the Boeing 747, the legendary Queen of the Skies, a double-decker giant that made international travel mass and accessible. Then followed the Boeing 777, a twin-engine masterpiece that easily crossed oceans, becoming the standard of range, reliability, and fuel efficiency. For many years, the company operated under a simple rule. Engineers were more important than anyone else. No airplane was released into operation until it was perfected. Safety was not just a slogan, it was a way of life. Profit came later, after quality, design, and precision. This was Boeing's philosophy, their pride, and the essence. However, in the early 2000s, everything began to change. First imperceptibly, then irreversibly. To understand how a company that epitomized safety ended up in a situation where its airplanes lose parts or take off with untested software, one must return to the beginning of a new rivalry. In 2010, Airbus made a decisive move by announcing the release of the A320neo model, a modernized, quieter, and more economical version of its popular narrow-body aircraft. This model burned less fuel, produced less noise, and most importantly, pilots did not require new training. A brilliant move. Airlines could update their fleets without spending millions on simulators and pilot retraining. From a business perspective, it was a brilliant solution. Boeing had to respond urgently. Their main competitor in this class, the Boeing 737, by that time was a true veteran. Developed back in the 1960s, it had undergone refinements and modifications for decades. Creating an entirely new airplane would take years, possibly a whole decade. But the company no longer had the time, patience, or budget. The decision was made quickly. Another update. Thus, the 737 MAX project emerged. The airplane was equipped with new engines with a larger diameter, like Airbus. The problem was that the 737 originally had a low landing gear. The engine simply did not fit under the wing. To solve this problem, engineers moved the engines forward and raised them higher. From a technical standpoint, the solution worked, but the airplane began to behave differently in flight. At full thrust mode, especially during takeoff, the nose of the airplane began to rise too sharply, creating a risk of stalling. To address this issue, engineers added a software solution called the MCAS, Maneuvering Characteristics Augmentation System. It automatically lowered the aircraft's nose if it rose too high. The idea was elegant. Maintain the old design by adjusting the machine's behavior through software and claim that the MAX handled just like previous versions of the 737, This allowed airlines to avoid spending on pilot training, which was a key advantage in the competitive race. But this is where disaster lurked. Pilots were told almost nothing about the existence of MCAS. This system was not mentioned in the operating manual or in training programs. Some crews mastered the 737 MAX literally in a couple of hours of online courses on a tablet. They did not know how the system worked or what to do if it failed. And disaster was not long in coming. In October 2018, a Lion Air Flight number 610 crashed into the Java Sea just minutes after takeoff. A faulty angle of attack sensor triggered a false signal to the MCAS. The aircraft's nose sharply dropped. The pilots tried to take manual control. The system intervened again, lowering the nose once more. This happened several times in succession. The struggle lasted only a few minutes. The machine lost. At that moment, it became clear that the problem was not with a single sensor or a single airline. It was a symptom of a much deeper crisis within the company. A crisis of culture, philosophy, and the very essence of the company. When marketing replaced engineering, and haste replaced verification. 5 months later, the tragedy repeated. An Ethiopian Airlines flight number 302 crashed shortly after takeoff. The same model, the same failure, the same futile struggle by the pilots for control. Even after they disabled the MCAS, the aircraft could not be saved. 157 people died. It was then that the world finally took notice. The entire fleet of 737 MAX was immediately grounded. But the problem was much deeper than defective software. It lay in the very culture of the company, in what it had become after merging with McDonnell Douglas in 1997. McDonnell Douglas was once a legendary aircraft manufacturer, but by that time, it was experiencing difficult times. With the merger, the company acquired not only assets, but also a new corporate mentality that prioritized quarterly reports over engineering ideals. The company began to listen less to engineers and more to financiers. Important were not aerodynamic innovations, but presentations for shareholders and profit growth. The headquarters was moved to Chicago, far from the workshops, from the noisy assembly lines, from the smell of kerosene and metal, far from the very soul of aviation. Gradually, decisions began to be made, not from the perspective of flight safety, but for the sake of savings. In recent decades, the aviation world has experienced many upheavals, and among them, the fate of one of the largest companies in this industry stands out. Production processes were redirected to external contractors, order fulfillment deadlines became increasingly tight, and quality control standards, once strictly adhered to, began to weaken. Even the Federal Aviation Administration of the United States, long considered an independent and principled regulator, began to rely more on the internal expertise of employees from one well-known company when certifying new aircraft models. This is how the cockpit management system passed inspection. This happened not out of malice, but rather due to mounting pressure, haste, and corporate tunnel vision, where the main task was to catch up with competitors at any cost. When internal employee emails later became public, it caused a real shock. They contained candid statements that the planes were designed by clowns and operated by monkeys, and that none of the employees would dare to put their family on such planes. These words were not spoken by whistleblowers or external observers, but came from the engineers themselves, those who saw the company's inner workings daily. Despite this, the company's management stubbornly continued on the same course, not changing pilot training approaches and not admitting mistakes. The main goal remained not to lose precious orders and not to fall behind in the competitive race. However, the company's problems were not limited to one model of aircraft. The new generation airliner project, which was supposed to be a symbol of innovation and technological progress, faced numerous technical difficulties. The carbon composite fuselage and promised advantages in fuel efficiency and noise reduction looked great on paper, but in real life, it was different. Production delays, battery fires, and malfunctions became not rare, but almost the norm. Aircraft deliveries were repeatedly suspended, first for months, then for years. Microcracks in the material, inaccurate fitting of fuselage sections, and defects in gasket installations were problems that simply should not have occurred in 21st century aviation. Nevertheless, problems continued with other company projects. The new wide-body airliner faced delays for 4 years. Budget overruns reached billions of dollars, and malfunctions in test engines became a serious obstacle. Even military projects such as the aircraft for the United States Air Force turned into a financial nightmare, accompanied by systemic errors and dozens of technical remarks. This no longer seemed like a coincidence, but rather a pattern. The company increasingly tried to balance its engineering ambitions with corporate demands, but it succeeded less and less. Today, the company is trying to restore trust by returning planes to routes and overhauling management systems. Pilots now undergo full training, and management has been updated, leading to more restrained statements. However, trust is something that cannot be restored with a wave of a hand. And, as if by fate, at the beginning of 2024, a new emergency occurred. One of the planes had a door panel ripped off in midair, instantly depressurizing the fuselage and causing panic among passengers. The Federal Aviation Administration of the United States once again suspended flights of part of the fleet. Passengers began to massively refuse to fly on these planes. Within the company, the voices of those who did not want to remain silent grew louder. Some employees, like John Barnett, a quality manager with 30 years of experience, repeatedly warned of violations occurring at the factories. However, he was found dead. And although the official version stated suicide, many did not believe it. Another engineer, Sam Salapur, openly reported defects in fuselage joints, claiming the company tried to silence him. Despite this, the company denied everything, and the Federal Aviation Administration began its own investigation. Amid this crisis, the company was hit by a wave of layoffs. Thousands of experienced engineers and mechanics left their jobs, some voluntarily, some due to cuts. With them went skills and knowledge passed down through generations, which cannot be replaced with money or corporate presentations. Meanwhile, shareholders continued to see a relatively prosperous picture. In the 2010s, the company spent tens of billions of dollars on buying back its own shares and bonuses for management. Even after the aircraft disasters, board members received multi-million-dollar bonuses. Safety issues took a backseat to Wall Street interests. Ironically, in trying to impress investors, the company effectively clipped its own wings. Orders were falling, deliveries were disrupted, and customer trust was disappearing. The competitor increased its advantage, surpassing in sales and deliveries. In 2024, the company recorded a loss of nearly $12 billion, the worst performance in decades. While the competitor earned billions in profit, this company, once a symbol of American aviation superiority, was now struggling to survive. Such a precarious position led to the constant postponement of even the new presidential aircraft project. For several years, the company has been unable to complete the updated presidential plane, delaying delivery timelines each year, citing financial difficulties and staffing issues. For an enterprise that once prided itself on precision and discipline, this sounds almost like an admission of helplessness. Aviation has always relied on trust. When we board a plane, we do not check every bolt, nor do we ask engineers about the fuselage's sturdiness. We simply believe that every detail is fine-tuned, every system thoroughly tested, and the people behind this machine prioritize our safety over stock market quotes. That is why this company's story is so tragic. Not because it made mistakes, everyone does, but because it knew how to do things right. It had the experience, resources, reputation, and talent. This company helped create the very idea of modern air travel. But in chasing profit and speed, it lost the most important thing: trust. Today, its planes are back in the sky. But the question remains the same. Who is now watching over our skies? And if it happens again, will we be surprised?